These ratings and forecasts we're going to be talking about are done by modeling that has been developed by Michigan Tech University and is used statewide, as Carmen explained. They're models, they're projections, they're forecasts. They're not some biblical truth, but they're as close as we can get in science to be able to provide this information. Tonight, and in those numbers that we're talking about a small subset, this 324 miles of major road. This is the Livingston County version, which again, not too surprisingly, looks much like what the region version looked like. In 2004, we had completed the first 5 years of a major pavement initiative. We had made a lot of progress. We had been able to take a lot of poor condition roads and upgrade them at least up into fair, and had done pretty well being able to manage the ride is how we look at it. In this 9-year period since then, it has been a free fall, and you'll see that the amount of poor goes from fewer than 50 miles, about 39 miles, to almost 200 miles in 2014. Just a huge change in condition in that period. What's going to happen, again, looking forward, all we do is we age the roads. Roads age the moment they're born, they start to age. Concrete, hot mix asphalt, fresh limestone on a gravel road, it all deteriorates because it's sitting out in the weather, it's being driven over by vehicles, and it just starts to deteriorate. So we know something about that rate of deterioration, and we can forecast it. And what we do when we look ahead, we see the system, we see the fare being driven out. Still using asset management principles, we may be able to bump some of that fare up to good, but the backlog of poor trumps everything that we're doing. Proposal 1 is one proposal that has some changes. There's a lot of moving parts to it. Bill Anderson's going to do his best to walk you through those moving parts. One of the big changes, one of the big complaints over the years is the amount of sales tax that Michigan puts on fuel that goes into your tank. They've been doing that since the 1930s, in the middle of the Depression, is when they put a sales tax on fuel. And it's been there ever since. And it distorts what you pay at the pump. What this proposal would do is it would limit every tax you pay at the pump to road purposes only. In Livingston County, this means an increase in our budget of $8.6 million, which is like 75%, which is huge when you talk about putting it into investing in roads. Our cities and villages would have an additional almost $1 million, and then there's revenue sharing dollars on top of that. So it would provide significant funding for roads. Simply put, what it does is you've got a projection on the left side of the screen that says, with no new revenue, this is what we can expect the system to look like. With the amount of revenue of the $8.6 billion, putting it all into pavement, putting it all into this system, putting it all in using asset management principles where you try and preserve the best of what you have and slowly lift up the worst of what you have. Would we be all good? No. We would move from a system that would be 79% poor to a system that would be 56% poor. And so you say, poor. So you say, so what? Well, so a lot. That just changes the whole dynamics of that curve. And then if you have the vision to look another 10 years beyond that, then you begin to see that big improvement that we're all hoping to see in our roads. So it takes that level of investment and it takes that amount of time to shift that deterioration curve. And that, I hope, is a takeaway that you consider when you go to talk about and then ultimately vote on May 5th. So, thank you. Steve?
Thank you, Mike. Bill Anderson from SEMCOG will be covering tax policy. Bill has a BA in Public Administration from Michigan State and joined SEMCOG 2 years ago after working for 30 years in Lansing as a senior policy advisor to the House Tax Policy and a variety of other committees. He might not appreciate me saying this, but he's also a Livingston County resident. So, thank you, Bill.
Thanks much, Steve. One thing, I don't know, Mike, whether you said it, but remember in this county, if you live in a township, it's Mike Crane. It's the County Road Commission that's responsible for all the roads in the township, unless it's an interstate or an M road. If you live in the city, it's the city who's going to be generally responsible except for those state roads. So in this county, 95% of the roads are going to come under the jurisdiction of Mike Crane, and he's got to figure out how to make it work, basically on a $12 million budget a year. What I get the pleasure of doing today is trying to describe to you exactly what we're going to be voting on May 5th. I wish I could say that this was a very simple proposal where the gas tax is going to go up or registration fees are going to go up and that's going to pay for it all. But no, we can't do it that way. This proposal has many different working parts. It's difficult to understand where the money's coming in, where the money's going out, but we're going to try and take you through it. This pie chart shows, for instance, currently, the money that the state collects to operate our transportation system basically comes from two sources, either fuels or registration fees. And they are almost exactly 50-50, both generating just under $1 billion a year for the purposes of operating our system. As was being described by Carmen and Mike, the problem with the diesel tax and the gasoline tax is it's set at a specific amount per gallon, and we're using less gallons, which means that has no natural growth pattern. The registration fees that you all pay, those annual fees, do have somewhat of a growth pattern to it because they are based on the original value of the vehicle, and then they are depreciated for the first 3 years, down 10% each year, and then after you've had the car for 4 years, they're frozen at that amount thereafter. So that's the current system of where we get the money from. Now, if you look at a gallon of gasoline, let's say we're selling gasoline at $3.18, and I noticed we got a lot closer to that yesterday when the prices went up 30 cents a gallon. Of that $3.18, the first amount that's going to come off is the 19 cents per gallon that you pay to the state, and that money is distributed both to the counties, the cities, and retained some by the state. Also, you pay almost an exact same amount in federal gas tax. That money goes to Washington, D.C., and yes, we actually do receive back the same amount of money that we sent to D.C. in federal gas taxes come back to this state. Unfortunately, it does take a federal general fund supplemental appropriation to make sure that that happens for every state. So of that 38 cents, half of it goes to the federal government and comes back to us. The other half goes to the state and is eventually distributed. The biggest political issue became the issue of sales tax, which Mike was talking about. This became the problem child in the debate over what should we do with roads. There were a lot of people who started talking in the campaigns that, you know, we'd be okay if all the taxes that we paid on gasoline went back to the roads. And you can see that that sales tax at $3.18 will generate approximately the same amount as those other taxes. So about $1 billion would be generated. The problem is our state constitution dedicates where the vast majority of that sales tax is to go. 75% of that money goes to fund the K-12 education budget. It goes to schools. About 10% of that is constitutionally dedicated back to our cities, villages, and townships in the form of revenue sharing, which is distributed on a per capita basis to each of our communities. Then the remainder of that goes to the state general fund. Now, 10 years ago, I would have told you the remainder of that also would have gone back to the cities, villages, and townships, but essentially that's been mostly diverted, and counties in this case, but that's been mostly diverted back to the state. So you have a wholesale price of $2.63. Excuse me, that's the retail price, that's the wholesale cost, plus the retail markup. So the legislature started focusing on, we're going to take all the taxes that we raise from gasoline, and we're going to send them back to the roads. The problem is, if you don't amend the Constitution, you are hitting schools at about $650 million a year mark. Local units of government, $100 million a year. That became the problem, and the result is we have to now go out and figure out how to do this. And this is the simple chart of where sales tax revenues go. 75% to schools, 10% to revenue sharing, and for the most part, the rest goes to the general fund. And there is this teeny tiny amount that does go back to the local units of government. So what are we going to be voting on? We are voting to amend the state constitution. That is the reason why we're having the statewide election. And it does require a vote of the citizens in order to amend the state constitution. But if we amend the Constitution, what we do is we trigger like 10 other pieces of legislation that will go into effect at the same time. If we do not approve the constitutional amendment, none of those bills that have been passed and signed into law will take effect. They will simply die because they all have something called, they're all tie-barred to the passage of this proposal. And as Mike suggested, all of this would go into effect on October 1st of this year if we pass the proposal. So what does it say? It says it allows the state sales tax to be increased to 7%. Currently, the Constitution says that we cannot have a sales tax greater than 6%. And of course, it went up to 6% when Proposal A was passed in 1994, when it went from 4 to 6%. You cannot increase the sales tax without amending the Constitution, and that's what this is asking to do. It doesn't actually increase it. There's actually a law that would go into effect to increase it. We are simply granting permission to the state legislature to increase it. It also specifically exempts fuels used to propel motor vehicles on public roads from the sales tax. That's the language that they use in the Constitution. One of the problems is, technically, if you put it in a boat, you can still charge sales tax on it, but I believe the legislature will close that down and also exempt that from sales tax as well. It eliminates the ability to use school aid to fund public universities. There has been a political issue lately where the legislature has taken some of the school aid fund and used it to fund universities, which most people thought was not going to be the case when they passed Proposal A. This closes down that ability of the state to take school aid money and use it for universities. It does still leave it for the situation where it can be used for community colleges as well as our K-12 systems. And it will also add in the fact that it can be used to fund career and technical education programs, and it will allow it to be used to provide scholarship for those programs as well as community colleges. That is what we're voting on. That's the amendment to the Constitution that we are voting on. And what else is going to happen? All of this are laws that are barred to this amendment and said will go into effect. The 19-cent retail gas tax is eliminated. Remember that 19 cents I was talking about? So the sales tax is eliminated and the current gas tax is eliminated.